I died on my 23rd birthday, choking on champagne at my own celebration. A celebration I'd thrown for myself because my family had forgotten. Again. When I opened my eyes, I was 16 years old, staring at my stepmother's face as she told me I couldn't attend my own mother's memorial service because someone needs to watch your sister's dog. The memories hit me like a freight train. Two lives, two timelines, converging in my teenage body. In my first life, I'd spent 7 years begging for scraps of affection from people who saw me as nothing more than free labor and a convenient punching bag. 7 years of being the family ghost, invisible except when they needed something. 7 years that ended with me alone in a studio apartment, crying into discount champagne because I'd just lost my job and not a single person had remembered it was my birthday. The heart attack the coroner listed as my cause of death should have been impossible for someone my age. But I knew the truth. I died of heartbreak, of exhaustion, of a lifetime of being unwanted. Not this time. This time, I was standing in the kitchen of my father's house, and my stepmother Monica was assigning me chores for the weekend, her voice that particular blend of sweetness and poison she'd perfected. My half-sister Bethany was at the table, scrolling through her phone, occasionally looking up to smirk at me. "Are you even listening?" Monica snapped her fingers in front of my face. In my first life, I nodded meekly and spent the weekend scrubbing floors while they went to a spa resort. This time, I looked her dead in the eye and said, "No." The word hung in the air like a grenade. Monica's face went through several colors before settling on an alarming shade of red. "What did you just say to me?" I said no, I have plans this weekend. I didn't, actually, but I would. Because in my first life, this weekend was when I'd found my mother's letters, dozens of them, hidden in the attic, detailing her life, her dreams, her plans for my future. Letters she'd written to me before the cancer took her. Letters that Monica had intercepted and hidden. Letters that included information about my mother's family in Switzerland. The family Monica had told me wanted nothing to do with me. The family that had been searching for me for years. Bethany laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "Since when do you have plans? Since when do you have friends?" The casual cruelty was so familiar it didn't even sting anymore. I'd forgotten how young they all looked, how unsophisticated their weapons were before they'd honed them to surgical precision over the years. "Since now," I said, and walked out of the kitchen. Behind me, Monica was sputtering something about respect and gratitude, but I was already climbing the stairs to the attic, my heart pounding with purpose for the first time in 2 lives. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the origin of my first life's slow destruction. My mother, Elena Rousseau, died when I was 10 years old. She was elegant, brilliant, and utterly wasted on my father, Thomas Grant. She'd met him during a summer abroad program, fallen stupidly in love with an American businessman, and given up everything, her family, her inheritance, her promising career in art curation, to follow him to suburban Connecticut. It was a mistake she'd realized too late to fix. My father was a mid-level executive at a pharmaceutical company, comfortable but not wealthy, ambitious but not talented enough to rise higher. My mother had been his trophy, his proof that he could snag someone out of his league. When she got sick, he'd been attentive at first, playing the devoted husband. But as the cancer progressed and she became less decorative and more burdensome, his visits to the hospital grew shorter and less frequent. He met Monica 3 months before my mother died. Monica was a nurse at a different hospital, divorced, with a 9-year-old daughter. She was pretty in a hard way, with calculating eyes and a smile that never quite reached them. She saw my father as a meal ticket, a step up from her apartment and her grinding schedule. 6 months after my mother's funeral, Monica moved in. 12 months after that, she and my father were married in a small ceremony I wasn't invited to because, as Monica explained with fake sympathy, "It would be too painful for you, sweetheart." The descent into hell was gradual at first. Small things. My mother's paintings coming down from the walls, her books disappearing from the shelves, the garden she'd cultivated with such care being paved over for a more practical concrete patio. Every trace of her systematically erased, and with it, every trace of the life we'd had before. Then came the differential treatment. Bethany got a new laptop for school. I got Bethany's old one with a cracked screen and missing keys. Bethany got music lessons and dance classes. I got a list of chores. Bethany got shopping trips and spa days. I got lectures about gratitude and not being a burden. My father watched it all happen and said nothing. Did nothing. He checked out of fatherhood the moment Monica checked in, content to let her run the household while he worked longer hours and took more business trips. When I tried to talk to him, he'd pat my head absently and tell me to be good for Monica. The financial abuse started when I was 14. I'd gotten a part-time job at a local bookstore, proud to have my own money. Monica convinced me to open a joint bank account so she could help me save for college. Every paycheck, I'd deposit my earnings, and every month, the balance would mysteriously shrink. When I questioned it, Monica had explanations. Expenses for food and utilities that I should be contributing to, costs for school supplies and clothes that she'd advanced me, mysterious fees and charges that never quite added up. By the time I was 16, I'd worked 2 years and had $17 in my account. That was the age I was now, standing in the attic, 16 years old again with the memories of a dead 23-year-old and a burning determination to rewrite every page of this story. The letters were exactly where I remembered them, tucked in a box labeled Christmas decorations that no one ever bothered to open because Monica preferred her own decorations. My hands shook as I opened the first envelope, seeing my mother's handwriting again after so many years. My darling Amélie, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm so sorry, my love. Sorry that I won't be there to see you grow up, to help you through heartbreak and celebrate your triumphs. Sorry that I chose so poorly in your father, that I was too proud to admit my mistake and go home to my family. But I need you to know some things. Things your father might not tell you because he's ashamed, because it makes him look bad because he's always been more concerned with appearances than truth. My family, the Russos, are looking for you. Your grandfather, Henri, is a good man, though stubborn. He didn't approve of my marriage, and we fought, and I was too proud to reconcile. But he's your family, Emily. You have aunts and uncles and cousins who want to know you. The family estate in Montreux is held in trust for you and any children I might have. You're an heiress, my darling, to a fortune your father could only dream of. There's an account in your name at Credit Suisse. The details are in the envelope marked graduation. Don't let anyone else find these letters. Hide them. Keep them safe. When you're 18, contact the family solicitor. His information is also in the graduation envelope. You are loved, Emily. You are wanted. You are worth so much more than anyone in that house will tell you. Don't let them make you small. Don't let them convince you that you deserve the crumbs they throw you. You are a Rousseau. Act like it. All my love always, Maman. I cried reading it the first time in my original life. I'd found these letters at 18, 2 months before graduation, and by then, it was almost too late. Monica had intercepted every letter and email from Switzerland, had told my father that his dead wife's family were just after money, and had convinced him to refuse all contact. But I'd found the letters, and I'd contacted the solicitor, and for one brief shining moment, I'd thought I was saved. Then Monica found out. And she'd done something so cruel, so calculated, that even now, with 7 years of distance and a whole lifetime between me and that moment, the memory made me physically ill. She'd destroyed the letters, all of them except one, which she'd edited with her own handwriting to make it seem like my mother had known about the Swiss family's wealth and had deliberately cut them off, that she'd wanted nothing to do with them and wanted the same for me. She'd shown this fabricated letter to my father, who'd forbidden me from contacting them. Then she'd stolen my acceptance letter to Columbia, a full scholarship I'd earned through perfect grades and a heartbreaking personal essay. She'd declined the acceptance on my behalf and enrolled me instead at a local community college where I could save money by living at home and contributing to the household. In my first life, by the time I discovered what she'd done, it was too late to fix it. I'd spent 2 years at community college, working full-time to pay Monica's rent while Bethany went to NYU on my father's dime. I'd eventually transferred to a state school, graduating with no fanfare, no family attendance, and crushing debt from living expenses that I'd had to cover myself after Monica convinced my father to teach me independence. My graduation had been on a Tuesday. I'd walked across that stage alone, no one in the audience cheering for me, and gone home to find that my room had been converted into a home gym for Bethany. That was when I'd finally left, finally cut contact, finally moved into that tiny studio apartment where I would die alone 7 years later, still trying to prove I was worth something to people who would never care. Not this time. This time, I carefully photographed every letter with my phone. Technology was better in this second chance, even if it was only 7 years earlier. I created backup after backup, uploading them to cloud storage, emailing them to myself, even printing copies that I hid in my school locker. Then I opened the graduation envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a bank card, a passport in my name, and a letter from the solicitor, Jacques Beaumont. The bank account had been opened when I was born, and according to the statement included, it had grown to just over $800,000 through conservative investments and regular deposits from my grandfather. $800,000. I'd had $800,000 waiting for me since birth, while I'd been eating ramen and wearing secondhand clothes and apologizing for existing. The passport was Swiss, obtained through my mother's citizenship. I was legally a dual citizen, something else Monica had kept from me. I sat in the attic for a long time, holding these documents, feeling the rage and grief and vindication of my first life, mixing with the cold determination of my second chance. In my original timeline, I tried to do the right thing. I tried to salvage a relationship with my father. I tried to be reasonable. I tried to include them in my new life, even after everything they'd done. And they'd rejected me, mocked me, tried to steal from me. When I'd finally gotten in contact with a Swiss family at 21, after Monica could no longer legally intercept my mail, and they'd welcomed me with open arms, offered me everything my mother had wanted me to have, my father had threatened to sue. Bethany had posted cruel things on social media, claiming I was abandoning them after they'd raised me out of the goodness of their hearts. Monica had tried to claim that she'd been my legal guardian and was entitled to reimbursement for my care. Well, it had been ugly and public and exhausting. I'd won, legally, but the emotional toll had been devastating. I'd never fully recovered from the experience, never fully trusted the love my Swiss family offered, never fully believed I deserved the life my mother had wanted for me. By the time I died, I'd only visited Switzerland twice, too anxious and damaged to fully embrace my inheritance. This time would be different. This time, I wouldn't be the victim begging for crumbs. This time, I wouldn't try to save people who didn't want to be saved. This time, I would be strategic, patient, and utterly ruthless. This time, I would let them hang themselves. The next 2 years, I became a ghost in my own house. Not the sad, desperate ghost I'd been in my first life, begging for attention and love. No, I became efficiently invisible, a shadow that fulfilled its obligations without complaint, but gave nothing extra, nothing emotional, nothing they could use against me. I did my chores without argument, but not one task more. I went to school and came home. I was polite but never warm. When Monica tried to start fights, I responded with cool disinterest. When Bethany tried to bully me, I simply looked at her with the expression of someone watching a child throw a tantrum, pitying and slightly bored. It drove them insane. "What's wrong with you lately?" Bethany demanded one evening, about 6 months into my second life. "You're being weird." "I'm being exactly what you've always wanted," I said mildly. "Quiet and out of your way." "You're being creepy," she insisted. "Like robot creepy. It's freaking me out." "Good. Let her be unsettled." In my first life, I'd learned too late that the only way to deal with bullies was to refuse to give them the reaction they craved. Without my tears, my anger, my desperate bids for approval, they didn't know what to do with me. I focused on school with laser precision. I'd already lived through these classes once, so the material was easy. I got perfect scores on every test, finished every assignment flawlessly, and participated just enough to stay on the teacher's good sides without being conspicuous. I was building a record, creating a paper trail of excellence that would serve me later. I also started documenting everything. Every time Monica took money from my account, I screenshotted the transactions. Every time my father chose Bethany over me, I noted the date and details in a journal. Every cruel comment, every dismissal, every instance of neglect, I recorded it all with the dispassionate eye of someone building a legal case. Because that's exactly what I was doing. I contacted Jacques Beaumont, my mother's family solicitor, through an encrypted email from the library. His response came within hours, and reading it, I cried for the first time since my rebirth. Miss Grant, I cannot express how relieved I am to hear from you. Your grandfather has been searching for you for years. Your mother's family loves you deeply and has been desperate to meet you. They have respected your father's wishes only because they believed, incorrectly I'm learning, that he was acting in your best interests. I've reviewed the situation as you've described it, and I believe you have grounds for legal action on multiple fronts: theft, financial abuse, fraud, and possibly more depending on what documentation you can provide. However, given your age, we must be strategic. Your father has legal custody until you're 18. I recommend the following: continue documenting everything, keep your head down. In 8 months, when you turn 17, we can begin preparing for your legal emancipation. Your grandfather is willing to provide you with the best attorneys in both the United States and Switzerland. When you turn 18, you'll be able to access your inheritance and make your own choices about your life. Until then, be patient. Be careful. Don't let them know you've made contact with us. The element of surprise will be our greatest asset. Your family is waiting for you, Emily. Your grandfather asked me to tell you that your mother's room at the estate has been kept exactly as she left it, waiting for you. You are not alone. Regards, Jacques Beaumont. I printed the email at the library, hid the physical copy with my mother's letters, and deleted every trace of the correspondence from the computer. Then I went home and was the perfect picture of a subdued, obedient stepdaughter. Monica thought she'd finally broken me. I could see it in the satisfied smirk she wore when I didn't react to her barbs, in the way she and Bethany exchanged triumphant glances when I silently accepted their abuse. Let them think that. Let them believe they'd won. I spent my junior year of high school becoming fluent in French and German, my mother's languages I'd studied in my first life, but now approached with purpose. I joined clubs that looked good on college applications, but required me to stay late at school, giving me excuses to avoid home. I took a job at a different bookstore, one where Monica didn't know the manager, and opened a new bank account at a different bank, one she knew nothing about. Every penny I earned went into that secret account. I was building an escape fund, even though I didn't technically need one, but there was something empowering about knowing I had my own resources, money I'd earned that no one could touch. I also started working out, training my body as I'd never done in my first life. I took self-defense classes at the community center. I ran every morning before school. I turned my grief and rage into physical strength, and slowly I watched my body transform. In my first life, I'd been thin from stress and poor nutrition, soft from lack of exercise. Now I was lean and strong, and there was power in that, in knowing that I was preparing myself for war. The college application process in my second life was different. In my first life, I'd applied to my dream schools in secret, hidden my acceptance letters, treasured them like precious secrets before Monica found and destroyed them. This time, I applied openly to modest state schools, schools that Monica and my father found appropriate for someone like me. I let them think those were my only applications. In reality, I was working with Jacques and a private college counselor he'd hired, paid for by my Swiss family, to apply to international programs. I applied to the Université de Lausanne, ETH Zurich, Sciences Po in Paris, and a handful of elite programs that offered dual degrees across European institutions. I applied as Amélie Rousseau-Grant, using my dual citizenship, my perfect grades, my mother's legacy, and the personal statement I crafted about finding my identity between two worlds. I got accepted to all of them. The letter from the Université de Lausanne came first, offering me a spot in their international relations program with a full scholarship I didn't even need. It was a formality, the scholarship, since my family could pay my tuition 1,000 times over. But I'd earned it on merit, and that mattered. I hid the letter with all my other secrets. My father, when he bothered to notice me at all, seemed pleased that I'd finally accepted my place. He approved of my applications to UConn and Central Connecticut State University, nodding along when Monica praised me for being realistic about your options. It's good that you're not reaching above your station, Monica said sweetly at dinner one night, about a month before graduation. Some people just aren't cut out for prestigious schools. There's no shame in being average, Amelie. Bethany, who'd been accepted to NYU's film program, a degree she'd never finish, I knew from my first life, laughed. At least you're not delusional anymore. Remember how you used to talk about going to Columbia? So cringe. I remembered. I remembered the essay I'd written, the one that had earned me a full scholarship. The one Monica had destroyed. The one that, in this timeline, I'd never written, because I'd chosen a different path entirely. Everyone finds their level eventually, I said mildly, taking a bite of the dinner I'd cooked because Monica had been too busy again. My father grunted in agreement, not even looking up from his phone. Perfect. Let them think I'd given up on my dreams. Let them think I'd accepted the limited future they'd planned for me. Let them be completely blindsided when I disappeared. Because that was the plan. A complete, absolute vanishing act. In my first life, I tried to leave with some dignity, tried to maintain relationships, tried to be the bigger person. I'd told them about Switzerland. I'd invited them to be happy for me. I'd offered them a chance to be part of my success, and they'd tried to destroy it all. This time, they would get no such opportunity. This time, they wouldn't know I was leaving until I was already gone. This time, they wouldn't get a chance to sabotage, to manipulate, to steal. This time, they would wake up one morning and find that I'd simply ceased to exist in their world. And by the time they realized what had happened, it would be far too late to do anything about it. My 18th birthday came and went with the same lack of fanfare as every year. Monica made a cake for Bethany, whose birthday was 2 days after mine, and when I came downstairs that morning, she looked almost surprised to see me. "Oh," she said, "is today your birthday too?" "It was yesterday," I said. "But don't worry about it." The flash of guilt that crossed her face was almost funny. Almost. But she recovered quickly, her expression shifting to defensive annoyance. "Well, you should have reminded me. I can't be expected to remember everything." "Of course not," I agreed, and went to school. I didn't tell her that I'd spent my 18th birthday on a video call with my grandfather Henri, my Aunt Marguerite, my Uncle Philippe, and a dozen Swiss cousins I'd never met in my first life until it was too late. I didn't tell her that they'd sung Happy Birthday in French and German and English, that they'd shown me the room that would be mine in the family estate, that they'd made me cry with their warmth and acceptance and joy at finally having me back. I didn't tell her that I'd signed the paperwork for my inheritance, that I now had legal access to not just the $800,000 account, but to trusts and investments and properties worth tens of millions. That I was, in fact, wealthier than my father could ever dream of being. I didn't tell her any of that because it was none of her business, and because the look on her face when she eventually found out was going to be so much sweeter if she had no warning. Graduation was exactly 4 weeks away. The thing about revenge is that it's most satisfying when your enemies have no idea it's coming. When they're so convinced of their victory, so certain of your defeat, that they don't even think to guard themselves against the knife they never see coming. I spent the weeks before graduation perfecting my plan, coordinating with Jacques, and preparing for my exit with the precision of a military operation. Step 1 was the easiest. I scheduled my graduation ceremony to be on the exact day and time as Bethany's moving day to NYU. I did this by quietly working with the school administration to shift my assigned ceremony slot, claiming a conflict with a family medical appointment and asking to move to the morning session instead of the afternoon. They were accommodating, especially given my perfect academic record. When I told Monica and my father about my graduation date, I watched her face cycle through several expressions before landing on feigned disappointment. "Oh, sweetheart, that's the same day we're moving Bethany to New York," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. We've already booked the movers and everything. I'm sure you understand that we can't reschedule all that. Of course, I said. It's fine. Graduation isn't that important anyway. My father, who'd been present for this conversation but clearly not listening, looked up. What's not important? Amelie's graduation is the same day as Bethany's move, Monica explained. But she understands that we can't be in two places at once, and obviously Bethany's move is the priority. It's a much bigger life milestone. I watched my father's face, waiting for some flicker of objection, some tiny indication that he might care that he was about to miss his daughter's high school graduation. In my first life, I'd still harbored hope at this moment. I'd still believed that maybe deep down he loved me. He nodded. That's mature of you, Amelie. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this. And just like that, my last lingering attachment to the man who'd fathered me withered and died. It was almost a relief. Super reasonable, Bethany chimed in, not even trying to hide her smirk. Not like you were going to do anything special after anyway. You're just going to community college, right? Right, I agreed and excused myself to go study. In reality, I went to my room and confirmed the details of my departure with Jacques. Everything was set. The morning after graduation, a car would pick me up at 5 a.m. while the rest of the house was still asleep, and take me to JFK Airport. From there, I would fly first class to Zurich, where my grandfather would meet me. My Swiss passport was ready. My American phone would be turned off and left behind. I'd kept only what I couldn't replace: my mother's letters, photos from my childhood, a few pieces of jewelry that had been hers. Everything else, all the cheap furniture, the thrift store clothes, the accumulated detritus of my unloved adolescence, I was leaving behind like a shed skin. I wouldn't be coming back. Step 2 involved a series of letters that I'd written and scheduled to be delivered at specific times. These were nuclear weapons I was leaving behind, timed to detonate after I was safely out of reach. The first letter was from my school guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson. It detailed the financial abuse, the theft from my bank account, and the stolen Columbia acceptance letter from my first life. Except in this timeline, I framed it as attempted theft, saying I'd hidden the letter from them because I'd known they'd try to sabotage it, and I'd be detailing everything to the appropriate authorities. The letter included screenshots of every transaction Monica had made from my account, every text message where she'd demanded money, every piece of evidence I'd gathered. Mrs. Patterson was a mandatory reporter. She'd have to involve Child Protective Services. The second letter was to my father's employer, detailing his misuse of company resources to support Bethany's lifestyle while claiming me as a dependent on his taxes for benefits he then denied me. This letter included copies of his tax returns, which I'd photographed from his home office, showing that he'd claimed me for dependent tax credits while providing none of the required support. I'd had Jacques' legal team review everything to make sure I had an ironclad case. The third letter was to the IRS. Tax fraud is a serious crime. The fourth letter was to Columbia University's financial aid office, explaining what had happened to my acceptance in my first timeline, framed here as a feared scenario I'd avoided by hiding my acceptance to international schools. I included evidence of Monica's access to my mail and her history of intercepting correspondence. Columbia took fraud very seriously, and even though I wasn't attending, I wanted it on record that someone had attempted to steal educational opportunities from a scholarship student. The fifth letter was the kindest one, though perhaps that's not saying much. It was addressed to Bethany and my father and Monica, and it would be delivered to the house 3 days after I left. This letter simply informed them that I was gone, that I was safe, that I would not be returning, and that they should not attempt to find me or contact me. I provided them with the contact information for Jacques Beaumont, who would handle any legal matters going forward. I did not tell them where I was going. I did not explain about Switzerland, or my mother's family, or my inheritance. I simply said that I'd chosen to start my adult life somewhere else, with people who actually wanted me. The letter ended with, "Thank you for teaching me exactly who I don't want to be." But the real beauty of my plan wasn't the letters. It was the timing. Because on the same day that Monica and my father would be driving Bethany to NYU, while I walked across a graduation stage with no one watching, My Swiss family would be doing something much more interesting. They would be purchasing my father's company. Let me explain how this worked because it's important to understand just how thoroughly I'd planned this. My grandfather, Henri Rousseau, wasn't just wealthy, he was connected. The Rousseau family had been in banking and investment for 4 generations. They had stakes in companies across Europe and North America. They had the kind of money that could move markets, the kind of influence that could reshape corporate structures. When I'd told Henri about my father's company, PharmaCorp, a mid-sized pharmaceutical firm focused on generic drug manufacturing, he'd done his research. It turned out that PharmaCorp was struggling. They'd lost several key patents, their stock price was down, and they were vulnerable to acquisition. They were also about to be investigated for some questionable accounting practices that Henri's people had uncovered. Nothing criminal, necessarily, but enough to make the board nervous and looking for a white knight investor. Henri offered to be that white knight. He bought a controlling share of the company through a Swiss investment group, part of a larger portfolio acquisition that wouldn't raise immediate red flags. The purchase would be finalized the week after graduation, but the groundwork was being laid now in quiet boardroom meetings my father wasn't important enough to attend. The beauty of it was that my father would keep his job. Initially, he'd show up to work on Monday after graduation weekend, after dropping Bethany at NYU and missing my graduation, and everything would seem normal. He'd have no idea that his company was under new ownership, that his professional fate was now in the hands of his daughter's family, the family he'd helped Monica cut me off from. He wouldn't know until the hammer fell, and by then, I'd be in Switzerland, far beyond his reach. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Graduation day dawned clear and warm, one of those perfect June mornings that feels like a promise. I woke up at 5 a.m., my stomach a knot of anxiety and anticipation. This was it. The last day in this house, the last day of this life. I dressed carefully in the white dress I'd bought with my secret account money. Simple, elegant, nothing like the clothes Monica had deemed appropriate for me. I did my makeup, styled my hair, and looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment. I looked like my mother. I had her dark hair, her brown eyes, her high cheekbones. I'd inherited her build too, that particular European elegance that Monica, with her harsh American features, had always seemed to envy. I'm doing this for both of us, Mama, I whispered to my reflection. Downstairs, the house was already chaos. Monica was shouting instructions at my father, who was trying to fit Bethany's ridiculous amount of luggage into the SUV. Bethany herself was having a meltdown about something, probably that her entire wardrobe didn't fit in the vehicle. I slipped past them, out the front door, and started walking to school. It was a 2-mile walk, one I'd made hundreds of times. The morning air was crisp, birds were singing, and I felt lighter than I had in 2 lifetimes. My phone buzzed. A text from Bethany. Did you seriously just leave without helping? So selfish. I deleted it without responding. I deleted her number too, and Monica's and my father's. I wouldn't need them anymore. At school, the morning graduation ceremony was smaller and quieter than the afternoon one would be. Mostly students whose families were traveling from far away, who'd wanted the earlier time slot for practical reasons. I saw parents hugging their kids, taking pictures, crying proud tears. I felt a pang of longing, but it was distant, manageable. Because I knew that tomorrow I'd have my Swiss family around, me. I'd have my grandfather and aunt and uncle and a whole network of people who'd been waiting to celebrate me. This moment was just a formality, a box to check. My name was called Amelie Elena Grant. I walked across the stage alone. I accepted my diploma from the principal, who gave me a warm smile and a firm handshake. I smiled back, posed for the official photo, and descended the stairs on the other side. As I walked back to my seat, I saw Mrs. Patterson in the audience. She caught my eye and gave me a subtle thumbs up. She knew. She'd received my letter yesterday, and she knew. By Monday, the investigation would begin, but by then, I'd be gone. The ceremony ended, and students flooded out to find their families. I walked in the opposite direction toward the back parking lot, where Jacques had arranged for a discreet car service to pick me up. I'd leave from here, go directly to a hotel near the airport, and wait for my early morning flight. I took one last look at the school, at the town where I'd been so miserable, and felt nothing. No nostalgia, no regret. Just a sense of closing a door that should have been closed years ago. The driver was waiting, a professional man in his 50s who greeted me with a respectful nod. Miss Rousseau? It was the first time anyone had called me that in person, and I felt something shift in my chest. Yes, I said. That's me. Your luggage is already loaded, courtesy of Mr. Beaumont's office. We've arranged everything for your comfort. I slid into the back seat of the luxury sedan and let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 18 years. I was free. The hotel near JFK was nicer than anywhere I'd ever stayed. My room had a view of the runway, and I sat by the window for hours, watching planes take off, thinking about the fact that tomorrow I'd be on one of them. My phone rang. It was a video call from Henri. Amélie. His face filled the screen, older but kind, with my mother's eyes. Tomorrow you'll be home. We're preparing such a celebration. The whole family is coming to the estate. We've been waiting so long, ma chérie. I can't believe it's real, I admitted. Part of me keeps thinking I'll wake up and it's real, he said firmly. You're a Rousseau. You've always been a Rousseau. And tomorrow, you'll finally be where you belong. We talked for over an hour about my mother, about the family, about my plans to study at Lausanne, about the life that was waiting for me. When we finally hung up, I felt more connected to these people I'd barely met than I ever had to the family I'd lived with for 18 years. I slept deeply that night, better than I had in 2 lifetimes. The flight to Zurich was surreal. First class was a world I'd never experienced. The big lie-flat seat, the champagne I was now old enough to legally drink in Europe, the attentive service. I watched the sunrise over the Atlantic and thought about my mother making this journey in reverse, leaving everything behind for a man who would prove so disappointing. I'm going home, I whispered to her memory. I'm going where you should have taken me years ago. When we landed, I went through passport control as Amélie Rousseau, Swiss citizen. The officer looked at my passport, looked at me, and smiled. Welcome home? And there, past security, past the barriers, there they were. Henri, tall and silver-haired and elegant in a way my father could never be. Marguerite, my aunt, dark-haired and beautiful and crying already. Philippe, my uncle, grinning. And behind them, a whole crowd of cousins and family members holding signs that said, Welcome home, Amélie, in French and German and English. They mobbed me when I came through. I was hugged and kissed and welcomed, and I started crying, and then everyone was crying, and it was messy and overwhelming and absolutely perfect. Mon Dieu, you look just like Elena, Henri said, holding my face in his hands. My beautiful granddaughter. Finally home. The estate in Montreux was like something from a dream. Sprawling grounds, gardens my mother had designed, views of Lake Geneva that took my breath away. And my room, my mother's room, preserved exactly as she'd left it, but updated for me. Photos of me as a child, ones I'd never seen before that she must have sent before she got too sick. My baby clothes, or her jewelry, her books. A whole life I should have had, waiting for me. That first week was a blur of family gatherings, of learning names and faces, of being welcomed and celebrated and loved. I started my French and German tutoring to bring both languages to native fluency. I toured Lausanne, met with the university staff, registered for classes. I was alive in a way I'd never been before. And back in Connecticut, my letters were being delivered. I didn't contact them. I didn't want to. But Henri had people keeping tabs on the situation, discreetly, legally, to ensure there were no complications that might affect me. The reports came back like chapters in a satisfying novel. Monica had returned home from New York on Sunday evening to find my room empty. Not just empty of me, empty of everything. The cheap furniture I'd purchased with my own money, I'd sold or donated, my clothes, my books, my possessions, all gone. The room was stripped to the walls, which I'd repainted white, covering the faded pink Monica had chosen when I was 12. The only thing I'd left was an envelope on the bare floor with her name on it. According to Henri's investigator, Monica had called my phone 17 times that night. It went straight to voicemail. I'd left the phone in a trash can at JFK. She'd called the police, who'd pointed out that I was 18 and there was no evidence of foul play. Then she'd opened the letter. The investigator had managed to get a copy of it. I'm not sure how, and I didn't ask. But apparently, Monica had screamed so loudly that the neighbors had called the police themselves, thinking someone was being murdered. On Monday, my father had gone to work to discover that his company was under new ownership. The announcement came at a 9 a.m. all-hands meeting. PharmaCorp had been acquired by Russo Investment Group as part of a portfolio expansion into American pharmaceuticals. My father, I was told, had gone very pale at the name. The new management was conducting a comprehensive review of all personnel and practices. My father's department would be scrutinized particularly carefully given some irregularities that had been flagged during due diligence. By Tuesday, Child Protective Services had opened an investigation based on Mrs. Patterson's mandatory report. Even though I was now 18 and out of the house, the investigation was still relevant. They wanted to determine whether there had been ongoing abuse that should have been reported earlier, and whether the school system had failed in its duty to protect me. Monica was interviewed. So was my father. So was Bethany. The investigator was particularly interested in the financial records I'd provided, the documented theft from my bank account, the proof that my father had claimed me as a dependent while providing substandard care. On Wednesday, the IRS letter arrived. They were opening an audit of my father's tax returns for the past 7 years, with particular focus on his dependent claims and whether he'd properly documented the support he claimed to have provided. And on Thursday, 1 week exactly after I'd left, Jacques Beaumont sent a formal letter to my father's attorney. The letter was professionally cordial, but its contents were devastating. It informed my father that I was permanently relocating to Switzerland and would not be returning to the United States for the foreseeable future. I had assumed my full legal identity as Amélie Elena Rousseau Grant and would be using Rousseau as my primary surname. I was claiming my full inheritance from my mother's estate, which had been held in trust and which they had deliberately kept from me. I was pursuing legal action for theft, fraud, and financial abuse related to the money stolen from my bank account. I was providing the IRS and Connecticut state tax authorities with full documentation of their fraudulent dependent claims. I was willing to settle all matters without further legal action if they, A, immediately repaid all stolen funds with interest, B, signed a legal agreement never to contact me again, C, provided written statements acknowledging their abuse and relinquishing any claim to my inheritance or future assets. The deadline for response was 30 days. My father called Jacques' office 47 times that day. Jacques, professional to the core, did not take his calls. All communication, he insisted, must go through attorneys. My father didn't have an attorney. He couldn't afford one, not a good one anyway. The kind of attorney he could afford was no match for the legal team Henri had assembled. But the real beauty of the situation was still unfolding at my father's work. The review of his department had uncovered exactly what Henri's people knew they'd find: misappropriation of company resources, falsified expense reports, and a pattern of using his position to secure inappropriate benefits for his family. Nothing criminal enough for charges, but absolutely grounds for termination. On Friday, 2 weeks after graduation, my father was fired. The severance package was minimal, as the termination was for cause. His stock options were forfeited. His reputation in the industry was effectively destroyed. Word travels fast in corporate circles, especially when a company has been acquired and is cleaning house. He came home to find Monica in hysterics. She'd just been served with papers from my bank, demanding repayment of $47,000, every penny she'd stolen from my account over 4 years, plus interest and damages. Bethany had been sent home from NYU after her first week when the tuition check bounced. My father's bank account, it turned out, had been frozen pending the IRS investigation. He couldn't access his funds, couldn't make payments, couldn't write checks. And then, because the universe has a sense of humor, Bethany posted about the situation on social media. She made a long, rambling TikTok about how her evil stepsister had abandoned the family and was now trying to destroy our lives with fake accusations. She painted me as a vindictive, jealous person who couldn't handle that she was the prettier, more successful sister. The video went viral, but not in the way she'd intended. The comments were brutal. People dug up the public records of the CPS investigation, the IRS audit, my father's termination. They found yearbook photos showing me in the background of school events, always alone, never included. They found Bethany's own earlier social media posts, ones where she'd mocked me, called me names, bragged about trips and purchases while I was working minimum wage. The internet is not kind to bullies, especially wealthy ones who prey on the vulnerable. Within 48 hours, Bethany was being torn apart online. Her Instagram was flooded with comments calling her a spoiled brat, a liar, an abuser. Someone found Monica's Facebook and started posting the court documents there. NYU's admissions office saw the video and the response. They launched their own investigation into whether Bethany's application had been honest about her family situation, because she'd written her admissions essay about overcoming adversity and helping her family through hard times, none of which was remotely true. Her acceptance was revoked. I learned all of this in summary reports from Henri's investigator, sitting in the garden of the Montreux estate with a glass of wine, watching the sunset over Lake Geneva. Is it wrong that I feel nothing? I asked Marguerite, who was sitting with me. About their downfall? She considered. No, chérie. You feel nothing because they never gave you anything. No love, no support, no kindness. They made themselves strangers to you. Now they're simply experiencing the consequences of their choices. They'd say I'm cruel, that I should have warned them, given them a chance. They had 18 years of chances, Marguerite said firmly. 18 years to love you, to choose you, to do right by you. They chose cruelty instead. This is not your doing. This is simply the natural result of their own actions catching up to them. She was right. I knew she was right. But I'd been conditioned for so long to feel guilty for taking up space, for having needs, for defending myself. It would take time to fully internalize that I deserved better, that I'd always deserved better. Your mother would be proud of you, Marguerite said softly. She'd be proud that you chose yourself, that you chose your real family, that you didn't let them diminish you. That made me cry, but in a good way. The 30-day deadline passed with no response from my father. Jacques filed the lawsuits, civil cases for theft and fraud, both in my name and on behalf of my mother's estate. The cases were strong, supported by overwhelming documentation, and my father had no defense. He tried to represent himself at first, showing up to court with a binder of evidence that mostly consisted of his own indignant claims that he'd raised me out of the goodness of his heart and deserved gratitude, not litigation. The judge was not impressed. The financial judgments came down hard. Monica owed me $47,000 plus damages and legal fees, a total of about $85,000. My father owed restitution for fraud and was assessed penalties by the IRS that ran into 6 figures. The state of Connecticut fined him for falsifying dependent information. They tried to negotiate, to plead poverty, to claim that they couldn't possibly pay. But Henry's attorneys were relentless. They placed liens on the house, on my father's retirement accounts, on anything of value. They garnished wages, though my father was now working at a much lower-paying job at a different company, one that had hired him despite his reputation, because beggars can't be choosers. Within a year, my father and Monica had to sell the house, my mother's house, the one she'd loved, the one that should have been mine. Most of the proceeds went to paying off the judgments against them. They moved into a small apartment across town. Bethany moved back in with them. She'd tried to enroll at community college but couldn't afford it without her parents' support, which they could no longer provide. She got a job at a retail store, the kind of work she'd once mocked me for doing. I know all this not because I was watching obsessively, but because occasionally things would filter back through the investigator, or through Jacques, or through random internet. Updates because, yes, people were still following the story online, fascinated by the dramatic downfall. I didn't gloat. I didn't revel in it. I simply noted it and moved on with my actual life. My life, which was beautiful. I thrived at Lausanne. I made friends, real friends, not people who tolerated me or used me. I traveled throughout Europe with my cousins. I learned to ski in the Swiss Alps, to sail on Lake Geneva, to appreciate art and wine, and all the cultural richness my mother had wanted me to have. Henri doted on me shamelessly, making up for lost time. Marguerite became the mother figure I desperately needed, teaching me about fashion and confidence and how to move through the world as a woman of substance. Philippe taught me about the family business, preparing me for the role I'd one day take in managing our investments. I studied international relations and business, combining my interests in a way that would let me work in the family company while also pursuing my own passions. I discovered I had a talent for negotiation, for strategy, for seeing 3 moves ahead, skills honed, perhaps, by surviving my first family. I dated. I fell in love, had my heart broken, fell in love again. I learned what it was like to be with someone who truly valued me, who didn't see me as less than or as a burden. I published my first academic paper at 20, co-authored with one of my professors on the ethics of international corporate acquisitions. It was well received in niche circles. Henry was insufferably proud. And through it all, I occasionally thought about them, my father, Monica, Bethany, but the thoughts grew less frequent, less charged. They became characters in a story I'd once lived through rather than active players in my present. 3 years after I left, Jacques sent me a message asking if I'd be willing to accept communication from my father. He'd been trying to reach me through official channels, and Jacques wanted my permission before forwarding anything. I thought about it for a long time. In my first life, I would have leaped at any scrap of attention from him, any indication that he cared. In this life, I was stronger, more secure, more certain of my worth. What does he want? I asked Jacques over a video chat. He claims he wants to apologize, to make amends. He says he's been in therapy and has realized the extent of his failures. And what do you think? Jacques' expression was carefully neutral. I think he's drowning financially and emotionally. And you're the life raft he can see. Whether his remorse is genuine or strategic, I can't say. But I can tell you that he has no legal grounds to claim anything from you if that's what concerns you. I'm not concerned, I said. I'm just trying to figure out if there's any part of me that still cares. You don't have to decide now. You don't have to decide ever. He's not entitled to your forgiveness, Emily. Not after everything. I thought about my mother, about what she'd want from me. And I realized she'd want me to be happy. She wouldn't want me to carry the weight of his redemption or lack thereof. She'd want me free. No, I said finally. I don't want contact. Not now. Maybe not ever. I've built a good life, Jacques. I'm happy. I don't need to revisit that pain to prove that I'm compassionate or mature. Some bridges are better left burned. I'll inform him, Jacques said gently. And Emily? For what it's worth, I think you've made the right choice. You don't owe them anything. After the call, I sat in my apartment in Lausanne, my beautiful apartment with its view of the Alps, filled with art and books and evidence of a life well lived, and felt at peace. I'd spent my first life dying slowly from their neglect, and the early years of my second life planning my escape. Now, finally, I was simply living. I was Amélie Rousseau, successful student, beloved granddaughter, trusted family member, valued friend. I was happy. And somewhere back in Connecticut, my father and Monica and Bethany were living with the consequences of their choices, trapped in the prison they'd built with their own cruelty. I'd let them ignore my graduation. I'd let them dismiss me as worthless. I'd let them think they'd won. And then I'd vanished, and by the time they realized what they'd lost, I was already gone, not just physically, but emotionally, legally, completely. I'd erased myself from their lives as thoroughly as they'd always wanted, except now they understood exactly what that meant. No access to my resources, no claim on my future, no part in my success. They'd wanted me gone. I'd given them exactly what they wanted, and I'd taken everything that was rightfully mine. 5 years after graduation, I was working in Geneva for Rousseau Investment Group's international division when I got an invitation to speak at Columbia University's business school. They were doing a series on young leaders in international finance, and someone had nominated me. I accepted. Not because I needed the credential, my resume was impressive enough, but because there was something poetic about standing in the place that had once represented my biggest dream, the place Monica had tried to steal from me. I flew to New York staying at the Plaza, and the night before my talk, I took a walk through Central Park. It was fall, the leaves turning gold and red, the air crisp and clean. I'd been back to America a handful of times for business, but never to Connecticut, never anywhere near my old life. I didn't feel the need. I'd extracted everything of value from that chapter, the lessons, the strength, the determination, and left the rest to rot. My talk went well. The students were engaged, asking smart questions about international markets and ethical investing. Afterward, at the reception, a young woman approached me nervously. Ms. Rousseau, I just wanted to say, I read about your story online, about your family, and I'm in a similar situation, and I wanted you to know that reading about how you got out, how you built your own life, it gave me hope. It gave me a plan. I felt something crack open in my chest. Tell me, I said. And we sat down, and I spent the next hour giving her every piece of advice I had, every resource I'd learned about, every strategy I'd used. I gave her Jacques' contact information. I told her about emancipation, about documenting abuse, about protecting yourself legally before you make your move. I told her that she deserved better, that wanting better wasn't selfish, that leaving toxic family wasn't betrayal, it was survival. When we parted, she hugged me, crying, thank you so much. And I realized this was the final gift from that terrible chapter of my life, the ability to help others escape similar situations. The knowledge that my suffering hadn't been meaningless, it had equipped me to be a guide for others still trapped. I endowed a scholarship that night, working with Columbia's administration, the Amélie Rousseau Scholarship for students escaping family abuse, providing full tuition plus living expenses, plus counseling and legal support. Enough money to change lives, to offer the escape route I'd been lucky enough to have. It felt right. It felt like closing a circle. I stayed in New York for a few more days, enjoying the city, meeting with American colleagues, attending a ballet at Lincoln Center. On my last evening, on impulse, I drove out to Connecticut. I didn't go to the old house. New people lived there now, people who would fill it with better memories. Instead, I went to the cemetery where my mother was buried. I hadn't visited since I left. I'd been afraid, I think, that it would hurt too much, that it would drag me back into old pain. But standing there now in my Chanel coat and my Italian shoes, with my life and my future and my family behind me, I felt only love. I made it, Mama, I said softly, placing flowers on her grave. I found them. I found us. I'm living the life you wanted for me. The wind rustled through the trees, and I could almost hear her voice. I'm proud of you, ma chérie. So very proud. As I walked back to my rental car, I passed by other headstones, other stories. So many lives, so many complicated family histories buried here. I thought about my father, about whether he'd end up here someday, whether I'd come to his funeral. I didn't know. Maybe I would, maybe I wouldn't. It didn't matter. I'd learned that you can't fix people who don't want to be fixed. Can't force people to love you if they're determined not to. All you can do is save yourself and hope they find their own way to redemption. But that's their journey, not mine. Mine had led me away, across an ocean, into a life I'd had to die and be reborn to find. And it had been worth every moment of pain, every ounce of effort, every calculated move. Because I'd won. Not just in the material sense. The money, the education, the career. I'd won the deeper game. I'd reclaimed myself. I'd refused to be diminished. I'd chosen my own happiness over their approval. And in doing so, I discovered what I'd always been worth. Everything. I'd always been worth everything. They just hadn't been worthy of me. I drove back to Manhattan, returned my rental car, and flew home to Geneva the next morning. Home to my apartment, my work, my family, my life. Home to the place where I was loved and valued and celebrated. And somewhere in a small apartment in Connecticut, the family that had tried to break me was living with the consequences of their choices, while I lived with the rewards of mine. I'd let them ignore my graduation. I'd let them think I was nothing. And then I'd shown them, and more importantly, shown myself exactly who I was. Not a victim. Not a ghost. Not a girl begging for crumbs. But Amélie Elena Rousseau, architect of her own destiny, master of her own life, winner of a game they didn't even know they were playing until it was far too late. And I'd never been happier.